Thanks for Hi guys, and thanks for tuning in on another episode of Design and a Half. In this episode, basically what we're going to talk about is a little bit about the challenges of being a creative person, and of creativity in general, because I think a lot of people have a misconception with regards to this in a lot of ways, just because they think that creativity and creative activities are just so simple and don't really present any challenges to the average person, whereas this is not necessarily true. In a lot of ways, we as creatives have a lot of problems trying to be easy on ourselves, just because what ends up happening most of the time is that our work gets scrutinized by a lot of people. It gets sort of viewed, and the thing about design is that design has the capacity to polarize people and to make them very have a very strong opinion about a specific subject, which what ends up happening is either your design or your idea gets dismissed, or it gets skewed, or the perception ends up being different from what you actually intended it to be. And that's what sort of drives us down. It sort of hampers our motivation, it destroys our self-reliance, and in the long run gives us a lot of problems with depression, because there's a lot of people that are fighting depression in the creative world just because of how they judge themselves and how they ended up judging themselves just because of how others judge them. So the perception usually is that if you did something, some other people come and review it and they tell you you should change this and this and that. And what ends up happening is that in our brains, we as designers and as creative people, what we tend to do is we tend to idealize a specific concept that we actually bring into the world, we bring to fruition, and being owning that concept and trying to refine it further and make it more appealing and so on, and basically putting it on the pedestal. What ends up happening is that when that thing crashes down, and it crashes down actually 70 or 80% of the times just because of iterative reviews and so on, our self-confidence gets a massive hit from this in a lot of cases. I know a lot of people who maybe don't want to speak out about it, but they are affected by it in most definitely. And basically for me as a designer, the biggest drive to do good is to also get good feedback in the end, because this is something that's common for a lot of designers. A lot of designers just do amazing designs because they want to be liked as people. They want to be appreciated. Their work needs to be appreciated, and it's not the only reason why they do it, but I think it's a good part of why they are doing it. And it's not about the fact that they are not self-reliant and they don't have a lot of self-confidence. On the contrary, we as designers end up not having self-confidence just because what we do tends to be exposed a lot. It tends to be put up for a lot of debate, and we get protective of the ideas that we put out into the world just because we are passionate about what we do. At least the people that I know and who I've spoken with are really passionate about what they are doing in terms of design. And that means that you sort of want your idea to be as perfect as possible, so that there's no more people coming in and tell you this and this is wrong about what you just did. And obviously there's two schools of thought for this, because obviously we should not care as much about those ideas as we should care about the finished product. But actually what ends up happening is that having worked for such a long time on a specific thing, on a specific product, you fall in love with it, not necessarily because it's yours, but because you put so much energy into it, and you want it to be perfect, or at least as close to perfection as possible. And when someone comes along and they don't necessarily understand your idea, and they don't understand what you're trying to convey, either because you're not perfect at communicating, and actually nobody is as good as communicating as they say they are. And they might tell you this, but they're actually lying, because most of the people have issues with communication. That's a fact. Nobody is perfect at communicating, and that usually happens just because we as people are different. I mean, it differs greatly from person to person what each of us understands. For example, my dictionary and my baggage of words might differ from the next person. And whenever I'm talking, he might misunderstand me and might think that I'm actually meaning something else when it's not the case. And this is exactly what I mean by that. It's one of the biggest reasons why we sort of falter in a lot of ways, and we get into these dark places where we start questioning, do people here actually value me? Does my design actually change something for the better? Just because whenever you start a piece of design, it starts off as something and ends up being something completely different. Why? Just because in a lot of companies, what ends up happening is that design is no longer done just by the designers. It's sort of a process that involves a lot of other people. And this is okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when we as designers sort of let this happen, and we have this false expectation that the design is going to come out exactly as we had intended it. Then it becomes our problem because of our unmet expectations towards the final product. And that's what sort of drives us down and creates all of these mental issues for us, if you will. However, what it actually means to be a designer is to always be up for scrutiny, always up for debate. And if you can't handle that, if you feel like that's too difficult for you at times, it's okay. You're human. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to demand yourself to be perfect, and you don't have to demand yourself to handle everything at all the times perfectly, or at least okay. You're allowed to fail, and you're allowed to fail because you're human, and because you have your own problems, and because design is part of your everyday life. You're not just doing only design, you also have other problems besides design. You also have a life you need to lead. You also might have a family you need to take care of. You might have kids. I'm just going to tell you something which happened to me while I was working as a designer a couple of years ago. I'm not going to name the company that I was working for, but you can probably deduce it by context if you're looking at my CV and whatever. So what happened was that a couple of years ago I was working for this company who was doing outsourcing services, and it was a really rough period in my life, just because both of my kids, sort of, one of them was just getting born, and he was a newborn at that stage. The other one was still small, because there's a difference of, I think, 1 or 2 years between them, something like this. It's really small, the difference is small, and that made it really, really difficult for both me and my wife to cope with the whole situation of having to raise 2 kids while in a new job, and especially in a new job that was doing outsourcing. It was in an outsourcing company that was outsourcing its services for several other companies. And the problem with outsourcing companies specifically is that they are not as employee-oriented as they would like you to think they are. Why am I saying this? Well, obviously, most outsourcing companies, what they tend to be doing is they sell you as a product to all sorts of clients, and basically what you're doing is they're renting you as a person to another company to work for them. And at that particular time period, I was okay with it, because I didn't necessarily know the sort of extent that this would be going. Um, where it gets difficult though was the fact that at that time period, my child being so small, he had a lot of trouble sleeping. This also affected us personally because we had trouble sleeping. And as you might know or might not know, sleep impacts your ability to handle stress, your ability to self-regulate in a environment with other people. It also hampers your lack of sleep also hampers your ability to think clearly, and especially to not be sort of jumpy and I don't know, angry all the time. And this actually happened to me in that particular time period. I was very stressed because of the child, because of the pressure that it put on me. It wasn't an easy time period for me, and the reason why it wasn't easy also because when I joined this company, I actually left my old team, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And I had to just because I was sort of in a situation where no more work was coming in for me personally, and I actually feared the fact that this might mean that I was going to be out of a job. And in that particular time period, we also had the mortgage for the house which we just bought. We had a lot of issues on our head. We had to renovate the house. There was not enough money. So the reason why I accepted this new job was just because I actually needed the extra money to be able to renovate the house and so on and so forth. And that was a very big mistake for me just because the amount of work I had to do there was pretty high, and the support I was getting was actually almost none, to be honest, with from both of my colleagues as well as the company itself. They had zero understanding for whatever was happening. I even tried to explain it at some point, and I think they, as far as I remember back then, they didn't do anything about that. They only sort of put me in a situation where I had to choose whether I should be sticking with the company or leaving. And sticking with the company meant I should be actually improving my own self, in the sense that I should be more careful about how I talk to people and so on. There were a bunch of things that went down that particular time period that weren't really okay for me, and I remember that period distinctly. And the worst part of it was that at some point I actually had to go see a psychiatrist because I was really not coping well with the stress that was put on my plate, both from the fact that I might be losing my job a second time, as well as the fact that I had my child who was struggling to sleep during the night. He was very active, he was always screaming. It was difficult to both me and my wife from that point of view. And having to go through a psychologist just to be able to cope with that part was difficult for me because it was the second time that actually happened. A first time that actually happened was, I think, back in 2010, I think. Yeah, something like that. That was when I first had my issues with depression. It was after my grandmother had died. I also had some other older relationship problems that sort of turned into a whole mess of itself, and that made me actually go through a really depressive period, and I had to go and sort it out with medication. So I had taken Xanax for some time just for that specific reason. It wasn't necessarily this huge depression that you might think of. It was mild, but it was difficult enough to affect my personal life because I was constantly having panic attacks in specific situations, and it was difficult for me to work as a person. And that being said, getting back to our original sort of discussion with the whole how it balances out your life, it's difficult to balance out life as a designer more than maybe something else. Maybe as developers and designers in a way are very much alike from that point of view, because It's not a job for those types of people who are going 9 to 5. It's really not. If you're into design, you're probably there because you're passionate about it, because you like either people, because you like, I don't know, creating stuff, because you're a creative person. And you should be really thinking about what this means for you, because in design, having to go with both career and family is not going to plan out for you. If your specific goals are to build a really good career out of design, for me right now it's really difficult to do so further, just because of the family, of not being able to invest as much time in extra work, in participating in extra curricular activities after work, as it would have been if I didn't have a family, or especially if I didn't have children. I'm not saying I regret my decision, not by a long shot. I think in a lot of ways, having children helped me become a better designer, just because they sort of helped me understand how they think, and they sort of reset my mindset from that of trying to pursue money and pursue, I don't know, relationships, or pursue financial objectives, to that of understanding people, understanding their problems, trying to figure out how stuff works more than anything else. So from that point of view, I think it was rather fruitful from my point of view to have children, but I was not necessarily focused on the career side as much as I was focused on trying to find a balance between career and family. This could be different from person to person. I think it was a good choice looking back on it, and I would probably do it again just the same. At least that's what I'm thinking right now. That, I'm not going to lie, I still am looking to build a career in terms of design, and it's something that sort of doesn't want to let me go, because I'm always sort of on the lookout of becoming both better as a designer and looking for a better job in terms of design, and what I want to get out of it and how I want to grow as a designer. But that doesn't say I might want to do it right now. It's something that I'm trying to transition and build slowly, brick by brick, rather than I know, having a specific time period. And I think here is something which a lot of the new designers are sort of making a mistake with. They expect, when you get out of school, you actually, most of them, I think they expect to be able to become seniors in like 2 or 3 years. After that, just be managers in like 2 or 3 years more, and after that be directors and do a lot of stuff, because all of that sort of information that we have and we're projected upon us in terms of a career, we see from movies. It's not, and it's also because we compare ourselves constantly with other people. And that could also be a good thing, it could also be a bad thing. It's good because it sort of keeps you real, in the sense that you also always have a pitch into the game, into this whole discussion about design. But at the same time, it's a bad thing because you compare yourself with other people who have a different sort of career path and trajectory and life specifications, if you will, than you do. And it's sort of unfair to compare yourself with others and not think about what you want per se, or should want. And this is what is difficult for a lot of people to understand. And sometimes even for me, it's difficult to stop comparing myself to others, because unavoidably you face other people every day and you see how they do. And you think about it, well, if this person managed to do this and this and that, why can't I do this and this and that after so much time and knowing so much stuff and doing so much stuff? And it's not necessarily because you don't have the same opportunities, it's because you might not have wanted it as much as the other person, or the circumstances for that person were more favorable than they were for you. Plus, as I said before, I think a lot of us just like get into this mirage of wanting to get into a better position quite fast, just because we see other people who get into those positions really fast, and we want to be in the same position as they are just because we think it's going to make us happy. What I actually think, it's not necessarily it's going to make us happy, but I think we sort of do that because we want to even the playing field. Because we think, okay, I want to get there just because I want to be satisfied with the fact that I finally got to where I deserve to be in terms of mental state rather than anything else. And I think this is the reason why a lot of people try to do that. The problem is that in a lot of cases we also sort of lie to ourselves with regards to this, and we say, well, I should be there because I'm in that mental state, but in terms of career evolution, you're not necessarily there yet. You have some things to learn and some places to go to be able to fully develop into that sort of person. The problem I sort of have with the current sort of state of design as it is the fact that it's largely political. It's no longer about design. It's more about how you create relationships to be able to get into certain positions. It's sort of about, it's no longer about what you personally know as a designer, but what other people think that you know as a designer. It's about how you project your image to be a professional or not. Even though you might not necessarily be a professional, there's plenty of people out there who manage to craft a social image of themselves that paint them as these absolute incredible professionals. Yet, if you think about it, we still have glaring problems in companies like Google and Apple and so on, where a lot of people make mistakes which are pretty beginner level mistakes in terms of UX, in terms of product choice and so on. Obviously we don't know the whole picture there, that's clear, but that doesn't mean that those mistakes aren't being made just because hiring hasn't become sort of a process where people are actually gauged by what they know, but what other people think that they know. And especially they're being sort of evaluated from the perspective of a social media package, from a political point of view. I need to have this and this many people of color, and I have to have this many Asians, this many Caucasians, and so on, instead of actually being about what that person actually knows. It's no longer about what you know as a person, it's about filling a quota just because you have to fill that quota. It's about showing a really flawless portfolio that has been overly worked and so on, when that doesn't necessarily have anything to show in itself. And just think about it. If a company like Apple and Google and Amazon is hiring people who just came off the desks of schools and barely have anything to show, but they are sort of hiring them into mid, not even junior positions, mid positions, just because they did 2 or 3 articles on Medium and sort of did a really in-depth case study about one specific thing, we should actually be worried, because that means that experience, as you know it, experience that people have accumulated throughout the years, is starting to no longer be valuable. It's no longer important for you as a designer to accumulate experience to be able to transcend your current position. It's about office politics. It's about who you know, who you probably should be sort of talking to in order to create a relationship that builds up into a promotion and so on and so forth. And I think that is really demotivating for a lot of other people who are working in the same company, and it also demotivates the whole business and the whole sort of job, like the whole profession, like designer, it becomes rather something which is centered around politics and about things that are not necessarily meaningful to the whole conversation about design, about people, about problems, about it becomes rather a discussion about business objectives, only business objectives, and when I say business objectives, I mean aggressive profit margins. It means how can you build relationships between people so they can leverage that relationship and get you what you want, or for them to get what they want from you. And I think that's a world where design no longer takes place. If you think about it, it's no longer a design world. It's a world where you can just as easily say it's a world that happens in conference halls, in absolutely every parliament out there, rather than happening in a research laboratory, in a development building, a research and development lab. And it's the main reason why a lot of people have started to think that design is so cool, just because it's all about how things look and how amazing they might be made. And it's really easy to make it all about the visuals, because we as people are actually very visual and express ourselves visually, and that means that just about anyone can envision something, put it on a blackboard and say this is a design, when in fact it's not necessarily a design, because it didn't follow through with a bunch of information that it's still missing to be able to connect the dots and have an actual problem or an actual solution proposition for a specific problem. That's how I feel like design is going nowadays, and this is the main reason why it's demotivating a lot of people, and why depression is really prevalent in a lot of people who are working in the design industry. It's just one of those reasons, and I'm sort of telling it from my perspective, because I obviously can't tell it from another person's perspective. I can only show you mine, and I can only hope it's good enough to build a case for trying to get back to designing and less about and trying to make it less about politics and less about trying to build and cancel people out and sort of take them down, but rather build them up and help more juniors, because this is another point that I wanted to make. There's not enough juniors in this industry anymore, because when you enter the design field, in a way, you no longer do it as a junior. You do it straight as a mid person. And I think this is very wrong, because it sort of takes out that whole 2 or 3 years that are missing for you to become a mid, where you actually understand and learn a lot of new things while working on projects, obviously. And we need more juniors to have and to educate in order to create a better design culture in the future. We need more juniors to be able to train them and to be able to help them develop into designers they can be. It's something that is absolutely mind-boggling to me, how it's possible that nowadays, for you as a junior or as an intern to be able to get a job, you need to actually have experience. Like, how the fuck is that going on? Who thought about that thing? Are you absolutely retarded? I mean, come on. That person just came out of school. How are they supposed to get experience? Why are you doing this to them? I mean, think about yourself, for frick's sake. If you were in his place, would you expect someone? How would you feel if someone came to you and said, okay, you just came out of school. If you don't have like 2 or 3 years of internship experience in a company, any company, I'm not going to hire you. How are you going to react? Just think about it from this market's perspective. Like in our situation right now, how are we supposed to go forward with this? If this happened in absolutely any type of industry, all of us would be fucked. For real. There'd be no hope. because there would be no people coming up to replace other people going out from the same profession. We'd be screwed. Like, it's not okay to do this. And this needs to change as fast as possible. I mean, we need to be able to educate the new generation of designers, and companies need to have a lot less expectations from them. I mean, we know it's an investment you're making into that person, but think about it like this. One of those that are doing the hiring is a manager. If you, as a manager, were in the shoes of that person that's coming and knocking at your door, if someone didn't take that chance with you right at some point in your career, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair right now, judging others based on what you think should be okay or not. And let's just not make it about the budget anymore, because I think that in a lot of cases, discussion in design is more about the budget than it is about users. It's about design, about solving problems. And we're sort of no longer doing design. We're just trying to appease people that are the biggest paid people in the room. And just like one of the people that I love to hear about on his podcast, like Darren Hood. He says this in a lot of his podcasts, and I actually agree with him. It happens in absolutely all of the companies, even the ones that I've worked with. The highest person in the room usually decides what happens or not. Whereas this is absolutely stupid, because that person doesn't necessarily have the correct information and the amount of insight into what decisions need to be made when something gets done on a very low level situation, or on a production level, if you will. He has super large overview, he has strategic overview, but he doesn't have the sort of the penetration that goes up to the bedrock of the situation where stuff gets done. And he doesn't even need to do that. It's not his job. His job is to make sure the whole fucking company is running. It's not his job to tell you what the hell you should be designing for. Because if it was like that, you could be just as easily saying to him, well, obviously, dude, you're doing a shitty job at being a CEO because, well, the company is not doing that great, Well, what can I say? Would it be fair to do that? Of course. Why? Because he's coming and telling you the same thing. And whenever I hear the same discussion about, well, yeah, but I'm the one paying you. Wait, what? You might be the one who's paying me, but I'm the one doing the work for you, so you can pay me. It's not this situation where you think that, oh my God, you're giving me an opportunity. No, you're not. We're both in the same boat together. It's like being in a boat, stuck in a storm, trying to get out of the storm unscathed and with the boat intact. Every person on that ship is as important as the captain. The captain is not more important than the guy who's shoveling coal, if it was a steamship. He's not more important than that person. Everybody's as important in a ship. And everybody's equally important and needs to do their job, which means that you don't have to interfere with whatever the crew is doing. You can probably tell them you need to shift more coal because there's an iceberg coming. But if you don't tell them if there's an iceberg coming and you just tell them shift more coal, what's going to happen is people are going to say why. And you won't, if you're the type of person that says, well, because I'm the CEO and I said so, you're just making sure that nobody's ever going to like you and they can't get away from you fast enough. That's not how you do it. That's not how you win people over. That's not how you make people play as a team. That's how you make people alienate and sort of go away from you. That's what happens. And I think it sort of has to change in order for the whole industry to progress. And it's not necessarily about design only, but also in technology, financing, whatever you want to call it. The sort of the discussion sort of ended up here just because I was I was actually exploring a tangent, but getting back on track because I sort of lost myself into that idea. Being a designer is not just about the flowers and the popcorn. It's more than that, and I think people that are underselling the importance of what you actually do, or that are overstating how much work, or are understating how much work you need to be doing as a designer, they are making a huge mistake doing that. You're going to be doing a lot of work as a designer. You're going to be staying a lot of time late. It's something that's going to happen for sure. You're going to learn a lot about what it means to work overtime, just because in a lot of situations, and this is happening in gaming a lot, designers and developers get sort of pushed more just because in gaming the release dates are public, which means that it doesn't matter what stuff goes down, that game needs to be shipped by this period. It's very rare that games get pushed back and release dates get pushed back for games. It's only when specific bugs come into play that are pretty game breaking and so on that it usually doesn't happen. And it's sort of similar in other situations as well. I've been in different types of companies that had different optics about this. In some, for example, I've worked in sprints, and the sprints were largely, I think it was 1 week. We had 1 week sprints at some point, then we had 2 week sprints, and we had like 3 week sprints at some point. Anyways, the point was that our development cycle was rather small because we're doing mobile applications. When we shifted our focus for desktop applications, that was when things got really long and stretched out. It was a whole year. Like the first company I ever worked with, they did a development cycle that was as long as a 1 freaking year. And that was okay because guess what? I did all of the work that was being done for that specific product. I mean, and obviously not the development part and so on, but I did whatever had to be done on the UI side. I did a lot of coding, some coding for the skin as well. I did marketing materials, and when I say marketing material, I'm saying the release newsletters, the new website, the BB board, the support website. I think everything was done during a whole year, and I also did videos for these things. I did music in some situations. I mean, I did stuff that normally doesn't fall into the bag of tricks of a specific designer. Like people nowadays don't just do that. You have like 4 or 5 people to do it in a normal scenario. But back then, you didn't have people that could do all of that and still be paid for a small amount of money. But when I started out, I didn't actually know how to price myself. I didn't know a lot of stuff. I actually went with the flow, if you will, and basically I developed this sort of thirst for knowing a lot of stuff, just because I wanted to be able to do a lot of stuff within the companies that I've worked for, and that's how I actually got to learn to do video effects. I got to do sound. I got to do physical UI, for example, or GUI for radios back when I was working at Frontier Silicon. Even had some proposals for Spotify adapters. Like Spotify worked with Frontier Silicon, and at that point they had a really special relationship, and they were building. We were actually building a sort of a platform that integrated the Spotify service, and it was making it easier for a lot of people, for a lot of companies like Bowers and Wilkins and Bose and so on, to integrate that service into their own speakers and have sort of smart speakers. And at some point, Spotify wanted to actually send a bunch of adapters for their clients I think it was in the Netherlands or Sweden. I don't know, can't remember. And I actually ended up doing some proposals for them in terms of how those adapters might look, just for to sort of make a proposal and tell them, look guys, this is another service that we can provide you with. Are you interested in this? The thing didn't get accepted, not necessarily because it was badly designed, but I don't think they managed to sell it to Spotify in the proper way, and this is why it sort of got rejected or didn't get approved. Plus, it was also there was another discussion about cost, and this is exactly what I said earlier. In sort of situations like this, between having a custom molded box to build an adapter from and try to plug in speakers and make them smart speakers, and having a black box with a stamp that says Spotify on them, probably going to choose the latter just because it's cheaper, even though probably the other one could have looked pretty awesome, and I think it sort of enhanced the brand idea that Spotify had. But it was a choice, it was what they did. I'm still pretty proud of what came out of the whole thing, and it's just one of those things that are a motivation for me to work in design and to be a designer further. It's not necessarily the accolades, but it's these small things that you end up doing. Look, this is a product I actually helped build. It's stuff like this that gives you motivation to be a designer, and when stuff like that happens, it's super awesome, and it sort of drives you and gives you a lot of energy to do better in terms of design, and to create more and be creative and think about a lot of ideas. But whenever, for example, your work is being scrutinized, and whenever you put something out for review, you're basically putting out a part of you that's vulnerable for other people to see and scrutinize and criticize and give their opinion on. So you have basically you sort of let others criticize you, who you are as a person, because we as designers identify in a lot of cases with all of the things that we do, because we're so we want them to be perfect. As much as, and as stupid as that sounds, we want them to be perfect because we strive for perfection. We strive to be perfect both as humans and as designers, and the products that we want to create, we want to be proud of. They sort of represent us, and if you criticize something that represents me as a person, in a lot of situations we'll take that thing personally, and that's why designers get depressed a lot. They have a lot of issues with self-confidence, because we expose ourselves a lot to the world, and it's so easy to be mean. It's so easy to say stuff like, this is crap, this is, who the hell designed this, is bullshit, and so on, when it's actually not that black and white in a lot of cases. Anyways, thanks for listening in, guys. Please subscribe or share if you haven't done so. I would really appreciate it. This was my second time uploading video, so hope you liked it. Hope you found it informative, and I'll talk to you next time then, which should be, I guess, Friday, if I'm not mistaken. That should be it. Okay then, guys, have a wonderful evening, and talk to you on Friday. Bye bye.